Hello, everyone. Let's discuss this question from October-November 2023, variant 1-3. Now, this is question number 2, and I'd expect all of you to be aware that question number 2 comes from research methodology. Question number 2 comes under section A, and in section A, we do not have any choice. Let's begin this question number 2. 2A over here reads, explain 2 reasons questionnaires are considered high in reliability. Explain 2 reasons why questionnaires are considered to be high in reliability. This is an 8-mark question. If we read this, this says, reward a maximum of 2 reasons, up to 4 marks are available for each reason. Now, what's the criteria behind this? Having a look at the criteria real quick, you get the first mark for making a point or giving a reason. You get the second mark for explaining that particular point. You get the third mark for selecting relevant sociological material. You get the fourth mark for explaining how the material supports that particular point. Now, this is how the this is how the CAI uses a criteria to help a criteria to grade this particular question, which is an 8-mark question. So you do all of this, you get 4 marks, and then you repeat it again to get the other 4 marks. 4 plus 4 makes it 8. Now, getting back to the question again, the question over here reads, explain 2 reasons questionnaires are considered high in reliability. To begin with, we need to know what reliability is. We use the term reliability to refer to a research that has been conducted or that can be conducted more than once, and you come up with the same results. What is reliability? A reliable research is a research that can be conducted more than once and you come up with the same results, right? Or in other words, consistency in terms of results. Explain 2 reasons questionnaires are considered to be high in reliability. Just think, right? How is it, or what do you think could be a reason as to why questionnaires are seen to be more reliable, right? Now, to begin with, if you have a look at indicative content. Now, remember, this says indicative content. This doesn't at all mean that you cannot write anything else. If you can think of any other point, you might as well use that as well. Use that too. So to begin with, the first point over here reads, questionnaires can be completed without a researcher being present. So they're more likely to get similar results if repeated by a different researcher. Now, just think of it. If you have a questionnaire, if you have a bundle of questionnaires, right? Questionnaires are filled out by the respondent, right? Questionnaires are filled out by the respondent, and the researcher doesn't necessarily have to be physically present over there to get a questionnaire filled, right? So if you have a bundle of questionnaires, if those questionnaires are being filled by multiple respondents and there are multiple researchers who are using the same questionnaire, the likelihood that you would get the same results is always high, right? So let's just say if there's a questionnaire that I distributed to a bunch of students, right? If on any other day another researcher walks in and uses the same questionnaires, don't you think they'd get the same results? Don't you think they'd get consistent results? Don't you think they'd have reliable results, right? Now, the first point. Number 2, respondents are asked the same question in the same order so they can easily be replicated. Now, a questionnaire, just imagine you design a questionnaire, you print out some 100 copies, because it's the same questions, it's the same thing being printed out again and again, right? So because there are same questions that are present in a questionnaire, the likelihood that you could repeat the same questions for maybe other participants or the same participants and you getting the same results would be high. Another point, questionnaires usually have close-ended or fixed responses, which could result in quantitative or numerical data being generated, which would help you or make it, which would be easier in terms of analysis. Number 4, they can be used to collect data from a large sample. They're less likely that the findings are the result of an atypical sample. Now, let's talk about a comparison between a questionnaire and an interview. You could possibly get you could get 100 questionnaires filled in an hour, right? Would you be able to interview 100 people in an hour? You would not, right? So questionnaires, when you talk about questionnaires, they can be used to collect data from a large sample, right? Which makes it less likely that the findings are a result of an atypical sample or an untypical sample. The word should be atypical sample though. Now, having a look at how the examiner says having a look at the example that we have over here. So the point over here could be, it can be completed without the researcher being present. How is it that you're explaining it? If you write because they're filled in by a respondent themselves, 1 mark for selecting relevant sociological material. You could say there's less likely to be researcher bias. Now see, the third point or the third mark over here demands for sociological material, and the Cambridge or the examiner is showing that the word researcher bias is being accepted or being used over here as sociological material. This is for the ones who worry a lot about learning a lot of names, right? So sociological material does not necessarily mean the name of a sociologist. It could be any sociological concept, any sociological term as well. The fourth point over here, example, so if a different researcher completed the study, they're likely to get same results. Now, how would this look like if you turn it into an answer, something similar? It could be something similar to this. If you have a look at this, I've simply copied down the points that you had in the marking scheme, right? So the first reason why questionnaires are considered high in reliability is because they can be completed without the researcher being present. Full stop. Questionnaires are filled in by the respondents themselves, and therefore there is less likely to be researcher bias. Full stop again. If a different researcher completed the study, they're likely to get similar results. Now, this is how you score 4 marks. You write another paragraph based on the same criteria, you get 4 more marks, 8 on 8 marks. Moving on really quick to the next question. Question number 2B over here. Now, question number 2B reads, explain 2 strengths of using an overt approach to participant observation. Now, number 1, do not get confused. Many students, when they're in a hurry, they end up confusing participant observation with non-participant observation, covert observation, or a covert approach with an overt approach. Participant observation, what is participant observation over here? Participant observation, you use the term participant observation to refer to a situation when the researcher or the observer is actively participating in the activities of the group that are being studied, right? So the involvement, the researcher's involvement in the activities that the sample is involved in would make it a participant observer. See, the name suggests it all, right? Participant observer. Now, the first thing that you should remind yourself of is what participant observation is. Number 2, an overt approach. Now, before we move on and speak about overt, we should know what the word covert means. If you have a look at this, or if you can spell covert, you'd see that covert comes from the word cover. Covert comes from the word cover. And in this case, a covert observation is on a covert observation is a covert observation is an observation where the people who are being studied do not know that they're being studied, or when the identity of the researcher is kept hidden, right? An observation when the identity of the observer is kept hidden, we use the word covert observation for that. And in contrast to this, we should know, if we've understood what covert is, we should also know what overt is. Overt, in contrary, is an overt observation is when the people who are being studied are aware that they're being studied, right? When the people who are being studied are aware that they're being studied or they're being observed, we refer to that as an overt observation, or in this context, an overt approach. So getting back to the question again, the question over here reads, explain 2 strengths of using an overt approach to participant observations. What we're talking about is, if there's a participant observation where the people who are being studied are aware that they're being studied, you need to think of 2 strengths of that, right? You need to think of 2 strengths of for that. And then the next thing that you should remind yourself of is, oh, this is a 6 mark question, and no, and how is it that you'd be able to score a 6 on 6 on this? Remember, this is a 6 mark question where they're asking you about 2 strengths. Like I keep on saying, for this, divide this or consider this as 2 different questions of 3 marks each, right? Now, taking this ahead, let's have a look at indicative content. Number 1, low personal involvement. 1, because it is an overt observation and the people are aware that they're being observed. You do not necessarily have to involve yourself into that research. I mean, of course, as a researcher, if you're involving yourself or if you're involving in this context would be you developing some sort of maybe affiliation with those people, or you might as well end up being biased in support or against the people that you're observing, right? So if the people whom you're conducting a research on, that they know what your role is, you can probably keep yourself at a side and not necessarily get involved into things that you shouldn't be involved in, which would eventually affect your research. Number two, the research could be carried out in a natural environment. If it is carried out in a natural environment, the validity, specifically especially ecological validity of that research would be high. Now for this, we need to remind ourselves what ecological validity is. Ecologically valid research is a research, or a research is considered to be an ecologically valid research when it is conducted in its naturalistic environment, right? For instance, if you want to conduct a research on students, you might as well choose to conduct this research in a classroom. That's the natural environment where you expect students to be. Number three, ethical reasons. You could safeguard the consent of those being observed. Remember, the word over here was overt observation. Overt observation, in other words, the people who are being studied, they know that they're being studied. And if they know that they're being studied, or if the people who are being observed are aware that they're being observed, in that case your research would be considered to be ethical, right? So you're safeguarding the consent of those who are being observed. The fourth point, you could avoid the possibility of going native. Now what does going native over here mean? If you are conducting a research on a particular social group, on a particular group, and you're, let's just say, a participant observer, and you're not an overt observer. You're not an overt observer, OVERT. Instead, you're a covert observer, right? If you're a covert observer, you would be expected, or if you're a covert observer, you would want to keep your identity hidden. And while trying to keep your identity hidden, you might as well go native, or you might as well go go you might as well cross the line of being a researcher and feel that you're actually part of that group, right? However, if you talk about conducting a research through an overt approach, when the people who are being studied, they know that they're being studied, they know what their role is, they know what your role is. When they know what your role is, the chances of you getting the chances of you getting the chance of you getting I'm missing on the word, the chances of you getting too involved into that particular group would be less, right? So the chance of you getting carried away is a better word. So the chance of you getting carried away and going native would be less. Moving on to the next point over here, it's easier to avoid being drawn into any illegal or unethical behavior of the group. For instance, if you are conducting a research on a criminal gang, right? Now, this reminds me of the research by Sudhir Venkatesh when he wrote a book, Gang Leader for a Day. You could YouTube this, you could Google this amazing piece of work by Sudhir Venkatesh. So in this case, he conducted a research on a black criminal gang, right? If it is an overt observation, if it's an overt OVERT, if it's an overt observation, the people you're conducting a research on, like I've been saying, know that you're a researcher, you're an observer, you're conducting a research on them, right? However, imagine for a bit if you're conducting a research on a criminal gang and you are trying to keep your identity hidden. If you're trying to keep your identity hidden, don't you think you might end up having to do things or being involved into activities of criminal nature, right? So if you know what your role is, if the people you're studying know what your role is, you wouldn't really have to involved into things that you shouldn't be involved into. The next point, practical reasons. It's easier for researcher to make notes. Of course, this is a practical reason. If the people who are being studied are aware what your role is, if they're aware that you're a researcher, you wouldn't really have to rely on your memory and try to memorize things and try to hide things from the observer. If they know your role is to conduct a research, if they know your role is of an observer, you can very openly be taking notes. You can very openly be taking notes, and this is would practically be more convenient for you. The next point, this allows researchers the opportunity to ask questions, right? Now, because the people, again for the 9999th time, because the people you're conducting a research on know that a research is being conducted on them, you have an option of asking questions from them, right? They know you're a researcher, they know you're an observer, you're conducting an observation, you can very well ask questions. And the more questions you ask, the more valid data or the more accurate data you'd be able to gather. The last point, it makes withdrawal from the group very straightforward. See, again, you are an overt researcher, or in other words, the people whom you're observing know that you are an observer. In that case, it would be easier for you to step out of that particular social group once you're done with what you were supposed to get done with, right? So this makes withdrawal from the group straightforward, right? In contrary, if I talk about conducting a research through covert observation, covert, covert observation, in that case, once you're done with collection, with data collection, you cannot just disappear, right? Leaving out of the group or a safe exit might not be very easy for you too. Okay, now that I hope you've all understood this, let me remind you, all of this is indicative content. You could write anything beside this and beyond this as well. Moving on, if we have a look at the marking criteria over here, this reads, strengths need to specifically relate to overt aspect and not participant observation in general. So remember, we talk about participant observation, but overt participant observation, right? You cannot simply write down about the strengths for participant observation. Now, reward a maximum of 2 strengths. For each strength, up to 3 marks are available. How is it that you get marks from here? You get the first mark for identifying a strength of overt participant observation. You get the second mark for explaining why this method has this strength. You get the third mark for explaining why it is a strength. Now, many students get confused between the second and third point. Have a look at what we read now. For example, low personal involvement. Okay. Oops. Yeah. So, for example, low personal involvement. For example, overt observers do participate. They view behavior in a detachable manner, right? Or in a detachable way, or a detachable, not detachable, in a detached way, right? A detached way, that is, you're not going native. You aren't really getting involved into things that you shouldn't be getting involved into, right? Because everyone knows you are an overt observer. And there's less likely to lead to more objective, is no, not less likely, they're likely to a more objective understanding, right? Now, objective over here is without bias, so let's read it together. If it is an overt approach to participant observation, or in other words, if it is an overt participant observation, you can have low person involvement while collecting data. And overt observers, you being an overt observers do participate. They view behavior in a more detached manner, right? So you're observing without getting too involved. This could eventually lead to less of biasness, right? Objective research, objective is without bias. So again, a research being objective is always an advantage. So you do this, and you could use any other points from above, or any other point that you think of. And yeah, I hope this has helped. Thank you.